Hello and welcome to the Red Chair podcast series. I'm Manuel Collazo, Vice President of Strategic Marketing and Business Development for Association Headquarters. For more than 45 years, AH has provided association leaders, volunteers, and staff with the most relevant and compelling industry news and information. Welcome back to the second episode in this year's Red Chair podcast series. Today we're talking to Michelle Covington and Janaba Figueroa, and it's all about strategic marketing. So we've had some great discussion, ladies, on different elements of a strategic marketing plan and some of the tactics that would support that. So I think it's worth having some discussion about the necessity for the plan, right? I think we work with some great associations. Everybody is very busy right now, right? We all feel like we're doing more than less, and I think there's a temptation to let inertia carry us through, or to bolt a bunch of tactics on, and that becomes the plan, right? So, Janaba, talk to us from your perspective about the importance of really pulling up and developing that plan.
I think it takes a lot of honesty. You have to be honest with yourself and the people who are part of your team and your board to kind of say, we've been doing the things this way, the same way for so long, right? And if you have been, really being honest enough to say, we need help. We need help in order to drive strategic efforts so that we reach a level of success from a financial standpoint, return on investment, because why are we doing all these things? Why do we have all these publications, right? They're great, right, for our audience, and they're great to kind of make us feel like we've done the things that we're supposed to do in business. But at the end of the day, you want to make sure that you reach the level of success that you kind of planned for when you started with an association or a business. And so, instead of it being these many projects, it has to be working with our team, working with other association leaders to kind of develop a strategic plan that speaks to the level of success that you really want to reach versus the everyday work that you've been doing to kind of get by. And it's over now for get by. You got to pay attention to what's happening in your industry. You have to pay attention to what your clients need, and you have to pay attention to your bottom line. And if you haven't seen growth from one year to the next, over the last 3 to 5 years, there's a chance that you need help to drive strategic efforts. And I know I'm super confident in this team and also in our content and creative team to kind of develop publications around the priorities that an organization has, to just make sure, one, that we're telling the story of the brand, really, and being able to communicate. I don't know how effective it is to be a part of that association, because you can tell a story all day, right? But why do people, at the end of the day, I took this class and it was, why am I doing what I'm doing right now? And that's what the teacher would ask us every time we started this class, right? So why are you doing the work that you do? Are you creating these publications so people go, oh yeah, that was a nice publication, and they toss it? Or are you creating this publication so that it can have an impact on your people and your process?
Well, and I think that um, companies in general, whether you're a nonprofit, an association, or a publicly traded large corporation, they spend a lot of time on budgeting and operation plans, but not so much time on that marketing plan. And if you're looking to reach certain goals and there's different levels of measurement, then absolutely your marketing plan should be shifting every year. The same thing over and over again. It doesn't match. Not all tactics work for all your goals. Right. So that should evolve and that should look different every year. And in fact, I would offer, and I know this is an area of sensitivity, is that when you create your marketing plan, there should be a percentage of your budget that you don't have a tactic associated to it. Because you have to provide a little flexibility to be able to pivot and be responsive to your members or even prospective members. January of 2020 looked far different than April of 2020. And those that had that flexibility in their budgets were able to pivot, immediately go remote, and start communicating to their members in a remote way, and we're very effective in doing so. But when you have every single penny tied to something that doesn't allow you to really be flexible and make the impact that you potentially could.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great point in that you want to tie as many marketing dollars as possible to something tangible, because that implies some degree of measurability, which will provide some data to feed the process, right? It is marketing plans, marketing strategy are dynamic in nature, right? They're not meant to be static. It's interesting, Michelle, I know that you and your account management team with are right now actively involved with a lot of our client partners on rescoping, right? And I think this is really important because in the industry, we've shifted, I think, towards multi-year agreements. There's an ease and efficiency in that is so important as we run leaner and leaner organizations, right? But that is not meant to be a static 3-year plan, right? So we work with our client partners annually on sort of this rescope, and it is what worked, what didn't, what data do we have to support those initiatives, and then we're asking all the same strategic questions, right? What new program have you offered? Is there a new certification if you're a certification-based association? Is there a new membership segment that you're either targeting, or a membership segment where you've noticed a drop that we need to allocate some dollars in conveying that important value messaging? So I do think that it's really important to think of it as sort of this living, breathing thing, right? That needs to be nurtured. We need to be attentive to it. And I know that we do a lot of that with our current client partners.
We do, and we have an ongoing communication with them in terms of how things are performing, and we have offered pivots and just saying, look, I know you're looking to, this is really working, and so maybe it's not necessarily always we need more dollars. It's let's shift the current work scope so that we can really focus on some of these tactics that are really making an impact, and the ones that are a little slower and aren't producing the results that we're seeking. Let's just shift those dollars around. So it's not always a matter of more. It's let's be smart and take a look at what we have planned for the year. But again, you have to have a plan, and that's why it's just again so important, because we can't make those decisions if there's not a framework.
Well, and what's implied in what you just said that I think is so important is you have to make time throughout the year to have those strategic conversations, right? So I was thinking, well, what's an example of a pivot, right? So our audience would understand there might be a certain cue, right? Or something obvious that says it's time to. And it could be anything, right? Like Janaba brought up COVID. That is certainly the extreme example. The world that we knew shut down, and now it's a different world. So much of the way we approached our business should have changed. And then, I mentioned this idea of a new certification program, right? So there are lots of things. It's very specific to your association, your organization, but there are a lot of reasons that if it feels different, right? If you're having to meet internally to talk about approaching work differently, if you're hiring a new position, if you are working with a new partner, those are all sort of indications that something has changed in the organization that probably would require you to go back and look at your marketing plan.
And that strategic plan will, so no matter what changes, that will be constant. And so you'll have this kind of framework set that says, this is what we do. So whether or not you stay or you leave, or we have COVID or not, this is how we move this plan forward, and this is what we need in order to be able to do that. But if you don't have that, when change happens, or people, drop off, they're like, I no longer want to be a part of this mission and this vision. Now what, right? You're like, now what do we do? This person is gone. They have all this information, and now they're no longer a part of the fold of what we're trying to do and build. But if you have this plan, you can easily just insert here, because you have to be able to do that. And you have to have, and so everybody sort of has to be on the same page with regards to the strategic priorities, but also with regards to what you want to accomplish in the end.
No, that's a good point. So the idea of building a strategic marketing plan or program can be very overwhelming, right? So the good news is that there's a process, right? And we go through the process. When I'm talking to new employees or new client partners, I will liken it to the way we plan our lives, right? It's maybe not as formal, but before we leave the house at the beginning of the day, we have a plan, right? There are a list of things we want to accomplish. There's a certain time frame. When we're creating new things in our lives, sending our kids off to college, we plan. We're planners. I think it's it's human nature. So, in building a marketing plan, there's a few key steps, right? So we start planning, which is identifying what are the key goals, what are we trying to accomplish, what are the objectives underneath that. There's at a certain point we bring in data, right? And we look at the analytics. How are the things we're doing working? And are there new things that we want to try? And what does the research tell us about how they should be working, right? So, we've talked about SEO reports, and there are web analytic reports. There are audience and readership reports if you have a publication that's either print. So gathering the data of what you do have, right? And then researching other platforms.
And competitors. What is your nobody ever if you want to grow, you could run forever. You go run, right, by yourself, 26 miles, 30 miles, right, by yourself. But if you never run up against anybody else, you never see what your potential is in order to beat that person or reach success in a much more efficient way. And so being able to look at your competition really, really matters. And I think, sort of these big companies, they do it every day. They do it all day, every day. They have teams that do it. They have teams that look at the analytics all the time, doing the research, understanding. You can watch one commercial for one company, and then the very next moment, you'll see the same product. And so being able to understand what your competition is doing is going to it's going to help you move forward a little bit differently and quickly, because you understand that, one, it takes money in order to be successful, and two, it takes a clear understanding of how you need to shape your brand to kind of sort of meet the needs of your audience alongside of people who are doing the same thing.
Well, and that's an interesting point, because I know that we have association client partners that will say, I don't really have competition, right? I am the only association in this space. It's very specific, right? But the way I like to frame that is we're all competing for our customers and our members' time. So if you're not competing with another association, you're competing with some ongoing certification need that's provided by a government institution, or you're competing with their job, right? So even understanding their work cycle will help you understand how to be strategic in how you put out content and when you put it out. So understanding the landscape is kind of the way I like to frame it, because there are folks that are very quick to not be able to relate to what competition means for them, but we're all competing for time and energy with our potential members and our members. So you mentioned budget. It came up several times, right? The cost of this, and that is kind of the $1 million question that we get. If we're fortunate, we get that question. A lot of times we're sort of handing a number and try to work miracles behind the scenes. But as we deal with more and more new associations, there is a formula for budgeting, right? And the opposite of being strategic in your marketing efforts is to start with a number, right? Whether that number is 10,000 or 500,000. The opposite of strategic is to start with a number and then try to back into a plan, right? So, and I know that's a hard pill to swallow at first, but I think let's talk about this to have our viewers put them more at ease, because we're not suggesting that a budget is unlimited or limitless, right? We all know better than that. But first of all, there are there's some framework, and there's some parameters for associations that are thinking about, well, what should my marketing budget be? And I would implore anybody to ask that question, right? Because that's strategic in itself. Let's think about Janaba, to your point about the landscape and competitors, everything's relative. And so 3 to 5% of your annual revenue is what typical associations that are in the B2B space, right? So you're not necessarily communicating directly with a single individual. Small business owners, it may be doctors, but they own medical practices. So B2B tends to be 3 to 5% of your gross revenue. And if you're B2C or direct to consumer, it's larger. They say 5 to 10% of your gross revenue, and that is very clearly grown over the years because we have phones now that we carry with us, and we are on 15 different websites every day. So media is more fragmented, and our attention span is much shorter. The best of us are spending less time doing just about everything. So you have to spend more because you're reaching people across more platforms. Engagement is harder because you have to do it with greater frequency. So those are the parameters. But tell us about your experience, either one of you, in building a budget that is more strategic than tactical.
Sure, I think you make a great point. Is the starting point usually is, okay, this is how much we have to spend. Maximize. I want ROI for this dollar amount. And really, it's flipping it on its head and saying, well, let's talk about what goals you're looking to accomplish this year. And let's build out a strategy around how exactly we're going to meet and exceed those goals. Then, okay, if the dollar amount is too high, then we start prioritizing. It's as simple as that. So you can still be strategic and maybe just not hit all the elements, but you're still hitting some. So there's value in that. And that's really important. And I think that oftentimes as a starting point, people get a little bit concerned about, I don't know where to start. There's so many things. There's so many demands. This board member wants this committee wants this. You really have to go back and drill down to what's your value proposition. What are you here to do? Who are you here to serve? And what are the goals for this particular year? And I think you really can simplify it that with an association particularly, there's 3 different buckets. You want to provide networking opportunities. So, okay, what do we want to do in that vertical in terms of how are we connecting our members? What's that connectivity in terms of events, meetings, podcasts, being on email and sharing conversations with one another? Like, what do we want to do in that space in terms of the networking? The second is a communication strategy underneath the overarching marketing strategy. So you mentioned earlier, what's the cadence of our communications, the frequency of our communications? How are we doing it? That's very important. And then what, of course, the content. What are we saying? What are we communicating to our members? And then that third bucket is how are we supporting the industry overall? Is it through advocacy? Is it through education and programming? Is it through credentialing? So that's a piece that's very important. Horizon watching, as you mentioned, Janaba. So we really need to determine, okay, what exactly then under those verticals are we going to flesh out with those tactics that we've talked about? And again, you can do it. You can be as comprehensive as you want to be, and then yes, it's reasonably. You can't always do everything you want to do, but then let's prioritize. So there's still a way to get it done and be strategic without having to have these $1 million budgets, which I know some smaller associations get a little bit worried about. It still can happen.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great point because it's more of a rebuttal that we hear from our association partners is why bother going through that exercise when I know my budget is this? Mm-hmm. Well, and I think you answered that question in part. And the thing that I would say, which relates back to something Janaba said earlier about being able to pivot, is you build a plan, right? And then you prioritize. And if your plan ends up twice your budget, 3 times your budget, well, that's a place to start, right? That's a level set. It's a reference document. And as things change, if you grow membership and revenue, maybe you find yourself halfway through the year with some dollars you didn't expect. And so now you don't have to go through that exercise mid-year. You've got a document to reference, and well, let's start to pull this in, or let's add frequency to our social media because we could only afford to do it twice a week. It's such a worthwhile exercise. Janelle.
And I think, most people, when they think about developing a strategic marketing plan, and they think about the budget, they leave things out. And so at first they go, oh, we have the publication and we have, maybe the work that we do on social media, but all those things kind of go combined together. So thinking about the products that you have, thinking about where they're going to be placed, the 4 Ps, where they're going to be placed in terms of the campaigns and tools that you use, thinking about how you want to promote those particular products on those specific platforms and what that's going to cost. So like you said, maybe we can't afford to do it for 5 days, but our particular audience is active on Tuesdays and Thursdays. And so we kind of push this information out at the best time for the client. And then thinking totally about how much all of that is going to cost, with kind of a step back, because if you don't take that step back, you'll continue to kind of, go, well, we spent $100, a week on this particular ad versus it being, in order to reach the number of 250 people to come to this event, we have to invest $5,000. That's what we have to do. And then and it's not rocket science. It says that. Like there are tools that can tell you exactly what you need to spend, exactly what you need to do in order to reach those goals. And it only makes sense for you to kind of sort of budget in the money that's appropriate in order to reach success.
Well, ladies, thank you so much. We've covered so much ground in today's episode. I thought it would be good and helpful for our viewers to end on some specificity, right? I think one of the challenges in marketing, even for marketing professionals, is so much of it feels intangible, right? And when you're working with volunteers, when you're working on a tight budget, you need things to be specific and actionable, right? Well, there is a lot of marketing that is in fact tangible. And once you've built that strategic plan, there's a whole list of tactics underneath that we implement for our client partners. But while there's no silver bullets, if there's one deployment, if there's one component of the strategic plan or one tactic that you found is essential for every marketing plan, or has just become really commonplace with the client partners you work with, what would it be?
I think this kind of happens fluidly. Like it happens very organically when you're interacting with a client. You're not necessarily taking notes of this, right? But the SWOT analysis is really, really important. And so being able to look at a company or look at an association or organization and say, you're really strong in these areas and kind of highlight the strengths of the organization, and then say, but you're really weak over here, right? And not as like a judgment call to how things have been moving throughout the course of the years that the organization has been in place, but to really just have an honest conversation about what exists and what does not. And then looking at the opportunities that you have that maybe you haven't, touched, right? Or the opportunities that you haven't really developed the way you should, and the strategic marketing plan does that. And then looking at the threats, but not in a way that is threatening. To look at the threats as also as opportunities, and then to consider all those things with relation to how you communicate with the audiences that you have, and to include everybody in that process. And so it's not just the folks that are part of your board or your leadership. How does your staff kind of sort of feel about the company? How does the audience that you're trying to reach feel about your company? And so kind of doing this kind of song and dance with everybody that is a part of the organization, but the people who maybe haven't heard about you too, in order to kind of get some feedback about how you're perceived in the market.
That's a great point, Michelle. Before you answer, I want to make sure I punctuate two things that Janava just said. So first of all, the exercise seems very textbook, right? And so I think folks almost shy away from it for that reason. But the focusing on the opportunities, the exercise in documenting them and talking to your stakeholders. But what you said about threats, I think, is so important because they are, in fact, typically opportunities. And we may shy away from them because we feel like that requires a whole bunch of action, right? Like those are things we have to build or we have to fix. A lot of times, the opportunities that we've identified are things that are already within our wheelhouse, right? We're just not promoting this particular educational curriculum, or we're not reaching this audience effectively. So it doesn't have to be scary. It just helps us prioritize. The other thing you said, which we didn't talk about a lot today, but we would be remiss in not mentioning, is we've talked a lot about external marketing, right? marketing is also the internal communication with your key stakeholders, your employees, your volunteers. So if you take nothing else away from this today on the internal marketing and communication side, share the strategic plan with the folks that are doing the work, right? Figure out how to communicate. And it doesn't have to be if it ends up being a really robust 6, 12, 15-page document. We're not suggesting that you email that to all of your volunteers. But use the language in there as your internal messaging. That's the way that you get buy-in. That's the way that you get everybody speaking the same language. And you start to develop an internal culture that will support that strategic marketing plan. So, Michelle, I might have interrupted you, but.
No, I would just say that my answer from a tactical perspective is there is no magic bullet.
Right.
Because the important piece, in my opinion, is really understanding your audience. So building those marketing personas and understanding who we're trying to reach or who we want to reach. And there's a ton of data around certain, aspects of people and who they are and where they come from and their age and their race and all of those things. So you don't need to do all that work, but you got to figure out who you're trying to target to begin with. And then you can start building some tactics around what that persona is and what that means. But if you have an association that just isn't very digital, then why are you even thinking about putting money into keyword search and pixel tracking and SEO and all those types of things? But if you have an audience that is very technology savvy and very mobile and those types of things, that's when you really need to focus your efforts. So I wish I had a magic bullet. I don't, but I think the importance is really taking that time to build out who your audience is. And I think that step is skipped a lot. And so that is something I would leave and reiterate is, AH and our marketing team can help associations do that. But that's a really key piece, because if you don't know who you're talking to, then you put as much resources and dollars behind it, and it's just not going to make the impact you're looking for.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. And it's so interesting because I think a lot of our association partners assume that they know their audience because they know their membership. There's some truth in that for sure if what you're trying to do is just get more of the same kinds of people, right? And I think that's generally at least a part of everyone's strategy. So yeah, we can check that box, right? But even if that's the case, if we've seen membership decline, or even if we've just seen our member acquisition efforts not produce the same results, then do we really know our audience in terms of how to engage them, right? So lots of good conversation, ladies. I want to thank you both for your time, Michelle and Janaba. It's been great to talk to you today. And for our viewers, thank you for spending this hour or so with us talking about strategic marketing. Incidentally, Association Headquarters on our website, associationheadquarters.com, has a lot of free resources to help you build your marketing plans. Most recently, we put together a branding toolkit that a lot of our association partners are already looking at and using as they think about the rebrands and refreshes that might be coming up. So visit the website and download some of those resources. Thanks.